morning, everyone. I'm Peter Aline, sitting in for Joanne Haigh today. Joanne's still under the weather, and we certainly hope that, Joanne, you feel better soon. Welcome, everyone, to Face It and Fix It. Hope you had a good weekend. Interesting news weekend stateside with all of the talk on women's rights and women's reproductive rights and so on. I'm sure that we will get an opportunity to chat about that for sure. Because that, yes, even though it's in the US of A, you know, it still impacts us around the world. I'm sure that there are some individuals of like minds of the Supreme Court, and then of course there are the others who will be totally against it. But perhaps it's something that we can take a look at, women's reproductive rights in 2022. So we welcome our viewers from around the world. It's nice to have you in company, and also our viewers here at home. Always lovely to have you join us on Face It and Fix It on CBC TV 8, on Facebook at CBC Barbados, and on YouTube. What's on your mind? What are the issues or concerns that you have that you'd like to see addressed and, more to the point, resolved? That's what our show is about. We'll try to, above all else, help you face it and fix it. And if we can't, we'll at least try to point you in the right direction. Remember, last month was Measurement Month in Barbados, and they're extending it, so we're extending it. We're taking a look at hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and long COVID. That's right. Dr. Kenneth Connell, hypertension specialist and Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI Cave Hill, has promised to join us each last Monday of a month. So this is his first time. And today we're going to take an in-depth look at cardiovascular disease. Lifestyle or genetics or both playing a part? Well, we'll find out. And Grenada recently went to the polls with a new government, and we are certainly taking a look at polling today. How correct was the polling which took place before? How is polling done anyway? And what goes into it? And if any changes need to be made to make the process and results more in keeping with reality. Joining us in our second hour to answer all of that will be research analyst and co-director of the Caribbean Development Research Services, CADRES, Corey SANDIFORD. But first, everyone's talking about this area of disturbance weather-wise in the Caribbean right now. And before we join Dr. Connell, let's go over to the Department of Emergency Management and speak to their acting deputy director, Mrs. Danielle Skeet, and find out from her, you know, how they are preparing for what will be, I think, an ongoing concern for the next 24 to 48 hours. So I say good morning to you, Mrs. Skeet.
Good morning, Peter, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us what you have heard within recent hours about the weather system? Has it completely developed yet into what they assume will be a depression, or is it still a tropical wave? What are you all hearing?
So at this point, it still is a tropical wave with the potential to become a tropical depression. However, independent as to whether it becomes a depression or not, I am assuming that we can expect to have some rain later in the week. And to this end, we want to ask that our residents here in Barbados continue their preparations. This is the end of June, the first month of the hurricane season, so there's still very much 5 months left of that season. So we're going to ask that persons continue to do those things that they know they should do. We're asking that you continue to identify those hazards to which your household is prone, things like flooding, landslides, high winds, and you do what you can to mitigate. So, for example, as we would have continued to tell you, in the case of flooding, you may need to invest in your sandbags. You need to keep your drains clear of grass cuttings and other plant material. You need to mitigate against those high winds, investing in your hurricane straps for your roofs and shutters for glass windows, etc. Also, of particular note, I want us to remember those members of our families with four legs, so our pets. We also need to ensure that we are looking after their interests as well. Just to remind you that there are no public shelters in Barbados at this time that allow for pets to come. So you need to be thinking about that, what you're going to be doing with them and for them. And of course, your livelihood is also very important. So I know that during the passage of Hurricane Elsa, almost a year ago now, there were persons, small farmers, they were raising their chickens, etc., and there were damage to those coops. So we need you to be mindful of that as well. Because after the passage of any system, we expect that life will go on, and you would want to be able to bounce back as soon as possible. So you also need to be making preparations for your livestock, fishermen, etc. You need to find safe harbor for your boats. I know that a marine advisory was issued yesterday,
Yes.
so they're expecting some pretty high swells, etc. On our front at the Department of Emergency Management, Peter, as you would imagine, it is a hive of activity.
I know.
We are ensuring that we touch base with all of our stakeholders. So I can tell you that our shelter wardens are on alert in the event that we may have to open shelters, and of course we're hoping that we won't have to. But just to let you know that those shelters are ready and raring to go, and that we are advising as best we can all of our stakeholders. So those conversations are ongoing. We're having those meetings. We're making sure that stocks are, there and at the adequate level that they should be.
Excellent. I think you have covered quite a few of the questions that I was going to ask, so I thank you for that, and I know you've got an important meeting coming up in about just under an hour.
That's right.
Yes, but when people hear 40 mile per hour winds, and slightly up, they might think to themselves, okay, it's not a hurricane, so I don't have to panic. I think that one of the things we've learned now from last year, especially with the freak storm and so on, nothing is a given. So would you like to just reinforce what they should be doing at this time, please?
Sure. So as you said, it doesn't seem, like that much, but we do have to be careful. These winds can come in. They can start to lift your roof if they come in through the openings, windows, etc., any spaces you have. So you just want to make sure that the house is as secure as it possibly can be. Additionally, you want to make sure that those things which are outdoors that cannot be brought indoors, for example, your water tanks, I know several persons now have them. You want to make sure that these things are properly anchored, because they can become very dangerous missiles in the advent of high winds. So things like your garbage cans, etc., you need to either bring them in or put them in an area around the house where the winds will not be able to get at them quite so easily. And this is why we do advise that it is important that you keep the debris, etc., from around your house. things like patio furniture, etc. Those things that cannot be brought inside, we do need to ensure that they are appropriately and properly anchored. And the same thing will go, for your businesses, etc. Those
Yes.
people with outdoor restaurants, things like that. You do need to make sure that your property is secure, and because you don't want it to cause damage to you, or worse yet, a neighbor when it takes flight. So we just want to remind people of that.
Thank you so much, Danielle. We won't keep you back. Thank you for, spending some of your time with us this morning and helping us to keep everyone safe. And we certainly just pray that, this might just be a little learning curve for us as we begin the hurricane season, and that there's not a lot of damage, and that people are prepared and are listening. So we thank you for that.
Certainly, Peter. And of course, for any other information, they can go to our website, dem.gov.bb, or any of our social media platforms for updates.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Stay safe.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. That's the Acting Deputy Director of the DEM, Mrs. Danielle Skeet. And right now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we get to chat with Dr. Kenneth Connell. Dr. Kenneth Connell is a hypertension specialist and Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI, and a friend to our show. And it's so nice to have Dr. Connell with us. And first off, let me just say, Dr. Connell, thank you so much for agreeing to spend the last Monday of each month with us. We are certainly going to be looking forward to sharing the vital information with our viewers. It's nice to see you this morning.
It's great to see you as well, Peter, and also thank you for declaring my contract nationally. So now I am much obliged to be here every last Monday of the month. But it's great to be here with you. And, this has been a turbulent weekend for public health, as you started off in your introduction. We had what has happened in the North with women's rights. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. And I like what you said, that, it's happening in the North, but we still have to be very much aware of it. And that's because public health emergencies and crises don't just stay in one country, right?
Quite.
And COVID-19 is a good example. But of course, the public health rights and public health policy of individuals is another good example. And so I'm closely monitoring, like yourself and many people around the world, the public health atmosphere within the United States.
I think that for me as a media professional, it's one thing. For me as a woman, is a whole other matter. I've got some serious views on what's going on up there with that. However, now is not the time for it. We're going to, as I said, we're going to definitely do a program, I think, on the importance of rights and government getting into people's bodies in that particular way. But government was sort of in our bodies with COVID because our bodies became like little wonderful chambers of perhaps expelling this virus into the atmosphere and creating havoc into the community. So it was important in that sense for them to be involved in that. But even there, we had rights. They allowed people who didn't want to take the vaccine, they allowed them the right not to. So
this is always going to be dynamic and balanced, right? So there's the right of the individual, and we all want to hang on to our rights. We don't want them to be taken away from government. We don't even want to have the threat of that happening. And then there is the right of the population to be safe. For instance, do I have the right to go out there and get totally intoxicated and get in a vehicle? No, I have the right to drink as much alcohol as I want, but I don't have the right to put someone else's life in danger. And I think the difficulty is balancing that mix. How do you balance the right of the individual versus the right of the population? And you're right, absolutely, vaccination is another good example of that, but there's several other examples of that. And, the COVID-19 pandemic is still very much in our midst. And this morning we are speaking about another one of its complications, really, that's occurring months, possibly years after recovery from the viral infection. And that's long COVID.
Right. What exactly is long COVID? I heard it mentioned sometime last year that they were noticing people who were recovering from COVID, but still with some remnants of it that seemed to have been lingering.
Sure.
What exactly is it?
All right, so let me take you back to a very simple model, okay? Their immune system. We have this immune system. It functions literally like a defense force. It's constantly hanging around. We don't really think we need it until we get an infection or someone has intruded, but it's constantly surveying and making sure that nothing can get past a certain stage without being knocked out, right? And that's what a good defense system is.
Right.
And so I'm going to borrow on the alliteration from fix it and face it, or face it and fix it, and that's really to say that the immune system has to do two things. One, it has to have two characteristics. It needs to be as fit as a fiddle, so remember that, but it also has to be smart and sophisticated. So what is fit as a fiddle? So let's use the BDF as an example, right? We expect that our soldiers, hopefully some of them are watching, have a certain level of physical fitness so they go through several drill practices and they do all these various maneuvers so that they're a strong defense army. And this equates to us eating healthily, taking our medication, getting lots of exercise in, all the other things that are thought to increase or improve or boost our immune system. So we have a fit. The army also has to be smart and sophisticated. It can't just randomly be out there just shooting randomly, hopefully killing a criminal, right? Or hopefully killing an invader, because many of us will die. And so in this smart and sophisticated way, we want to say to the army, listen, if you see this person in a red hat and a yellow shirt, that's the virus we want you to kill. If he's not wearing quite a yellow hat, but maybe an orange hat, I want you to kill him as well. This is where vaccination comes in. It helps your immune system to be smarter and to be sophisticated. Now, you can see that both of those are important.
Yes.
You can't be smart and sophisticated, but not fit as a fiddle. So you need both those things for strong defense. Sometimes the immune system gets it wrong because some viruses are extremely smart. It tricks the immune system into not being so smart at all, but not being able to recognize itself from an invader. And there are many examples of this. So long COVID or post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-19 PASC syndrome is the one we're discussing. But did you know, for instance, that type 1 diabetes that affects your pancreas is thought to have been triggered by a viral insult? So the virus kind of sets your immune system up, almost like a computer virus that's there lingering around in your system until you press the wrong button, and then so your system is now attacking everywhere. Remember, this immune system protects everywhere. It certainly has access to everywhere, right? Every part of our body, and therefore it can attack anywhere. And that's why PASC or long COVID affects so many different parts: the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the skin. So all of these parts are affected, and that's because your immune system cannot differentiate whether it's still attacking COVID-19. And so this schematic gives us an idea of the time. You can see just before you get infected, 1 or 2 weeks before, we all know these curves. We have our PCR test done or rapid antigen, it comes back positive. You can see the areas there up until about week 2, week 3, where your test is positive. And some of us, believe it or not, don't even know we have the infection, right? Because with Omicron especially, we're asymptomatic or we don't know we have it. So we
Right.
think that everything has cleared. What happens, however, is this is the perfect period for your immune system to be tricked, what's known as immunomodulation. And then when we move to weeks 3 and 4 on the schematic, you, you start getting your immune system not attacking the virus, but attacking other parts of the body. And we've seen this, for instance, in reports such as people developing clots or inflammation of the heart, or even the so-called brain fog, where you're slightly forgetful. It seems at this point in time that it is reasonable to expect the symptoms, if you are getting symptoms of COVID-19, to disappear or to have resolved after about 4 to 5 weeks. If they continue, it's time to talk to your healthcare provider as to whether you might have long COVID or PASC syndrome.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, Dr. Connell, and when we come back, we can start with that thematic again, and schematic again, thematic, where did that come from? But anyway, that schematic again, and take a look at what happens after weeks 3 and 4. I saw something that I wanna ask a question on, so we'll do that when we come back. You're watching Face It and Fix It for today, Monday. We have Dr. Kenneth Connell joining us for his last Monday in the month session with us, and we're taking a look at long COVID. And you had shared a schematic with us just now, and I noticed that the line continued past week 4, going then onwards into a week 12 and 6 months.
Right.
So you're saying then that in some persons who've had COVID, recovery is not necessarily a total recovery, that there are ongoing problems, and that COVID itself can cause NCDs, basically.
Yes.
Because I'm seeing chronic kidney disease, that's an NCD. Problems with your heart, with your lungs. So, well, COVID's still continuing, so we don't know how long is long that this long COVID will be.
And that's absolutely correct. And this is why the United States, even pre-last weekend, has dedicated more than $1 billion to the study of long COVID. If you go back to the schematic, it's the green curve in the schematic shows the
If our director
virus
can put it up again, please. Put back up the schematic again, please, director. So that, yes, thank you. The green curve.
So green curve, right? Now you remember earlier in the pandemic, we had people who were testing positive for COVID-19 weeks, sometimes months afterwards. And we recognize that this was not that because they were actively replicating the virus or producing more virus. It certainly did not mean that they were still infectious. It just meant that there were dead viral particles that were around. So that kind of explains why this curve prolongs out for several weeks after. But most importantly, the pink curve is very important because it shows this is the point where you're no longer infectious. All of us have now left isolation by this point. We have a negative rapid antigen test, and therefore we're free to continue. It doesn't mean that a few weeks later we may not test positive on PCR, but that's then irrelevant. It's not active virus. But what's happening more to the right of the curve, as you pointed out, and you hit the nail on the head there, is really an NCD crisis, right? It's all the things that cause NCDs, such as all the organs that are affected, such as the heart, such as the brain, such as the kidneys, and more importantly, also these clots that are forming. So you have a whole cascade. Remember, I started by saying the immune system is designed to protect everywhere, and therefore it can affect everywhere. So mental health, things like anxiety, depression, sleep problems, respiratory system, there's no surprise there. The kidneys, we have seen young people at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital presenting in acute kidney injury requiring dialysis. And some of them have had COVID-19 who did not know they had it. So they were completely asymptomatic, right?
Yes.
So this then brings about the question, well, so what do I do if I had COVID, right? Do I just sit there and wait? Well, you don't. You sit and you monitor, certainly. If you are having unusual symptoms, such as memory loss, or you're a bit more short of breath than you should be, or you usually are, not the type of person who is not at home, exercising as much, and all of a sudden they say, well, I am not as physically fit as I used to be, when you weren't really that fit before. So if you were fit before, but now you're feeling a bit more lethargic, and you might feel as if you have to stop your daily activities, and this is happening more than 4 to 6 weeks have passed, and this is still happening, it's time to have a discussion with your doctor because this could be long COVID.
Right.
I just want to add on a special point here that remember we said that your immune system needs to have two main characteristics: fit as a fiddle, and smart and sophisticated. So if it's not too smart, then what happens? It's more susceptible to long COVID, regardless of how fit it is. So regardless of how much exercise you're doing, how well you're adhering to your medication, if your immune system is not smart, it can easily be corrupted and therefore develop a long COVID type syndrome. What helps your immune system be smarter? It's vaccination, and therefore those people who have been vaccinated are less likely to develop complications such as long COVID or PASC syndrome.
One of the things, doctor, that I always love to ask when it comes to things like this is the importance of, yes, conventional medicine, but also in conjunction with natural medicine. The old people like to rub Vicks on the bottom of the feet, for coughs and so on, put on socks. I remember my grandmother used to pour coconut oil on the top of your head and in your chest to help break up a cold. And there are still some people who within our community believe in the natural medicines. Where do we stand on this? And please note I said in conjunction with, not to leave one out and depend solely on the other. But where is the medical fraternity on this?
Okay, so let me just respond by first saying that many patients, including the statement just made by yourself, somehow think that natural products or that prescribed medicines are not natural. And many of our prescribed products used in the treatment of heart failure, for instance, or even in some cancers, are natural derivatives. All that happens is that they've been purified, they've been placed in the form of a tablet, so you don't necessarily have to boil a bush or anything like that.
I know.
Those kind of things.
Grandmother raised, all right, grandmother raised. Yeah, so, can't get away from it.
And we also know things that have properties that that are normally prescribed. For instance, I remember with some pain, castor oil, right? And its laxative properties just before school starts, right?
Shark
So
oil
those things,
too.
sharp oil
I'm a
as well.
generation before you. Shark
So
oil.
the complementary medicine, and this is why it's complementary. And I'm glad that you said you don't stop. But
No.
what you do need to be careful is that some complementary products, because we don't quite know what's in a plant outside, or we don't quite know what's in an oil, because it's several chemicals and inside of that substance. It is possible that some of these may interact with prescribed medication. So if you're going to take these things, you have to be extra vigilant. I often say to people, especially patients as they come, so the FDA warning says this about this drug, and there's usually a long list of things. And if you get anywhere around halfway of that list and you still decide to take the drug, then people say, well, I don't know if I really want to take this. But you know what? Guess what? If we were to subject Morbi, chicken soup, all these things that we have naturally, coconut water, to an FDA analysis, we probably would not consume them either. So it's just the fact that these things are declared for prescribed drugs. For unprescribed drugs, they're a bit more relaxed. So where does the medical community stand? I'm going to rephrase your question and say, where should the medical community stand? And that is, we should have a cautious but open relationship with complementary medicine, right? And patients should be encouraged, especially if there is no interaction known, and we don't know all of the interactions, to use what home remedies they believe are safe and effective. For instance, we know that menthol crystals invict, and we know that certain substances that help suppress your cough are natural, right? And we also know, for instance, our home remedies, we also know, for instance, that turmeric has antioxidant properties. We know that ginger can boost your immune system, so it makes it fitter as a fiddle, right?
And settle your stomach, yes.
Settle your stomach, there you go. So it's not an either or. And I think sometimes patients anticipate on going to the healthcare provider that we're going to say, just get rid of that foolishness. But it's not. Remember that medicine started not with prescribed tablets. It started with exactly what you prescribed. The village doctor walking around with various poultices and herbs and those kind of things. And to be quite honest, all that we've done is purified and made and standardized those products so that they're now prescribed in specific quantities.
Okay, thank you for that, because I know that that's a concern. People were saying as soon as you started to cough, look, get some around the world, and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you try to tell them, but remember to do it in conjunction with, not instead of. So I'm glad that you said it's complementary. Yeah.
Yes.
Who exactly is susceptible, though, to long COVID, Dr. Connell?
Well, let's look at the analogy again. Here is this immune system that has been tricked. Basically, that's what has happened, right? It's not meant to attack your own self. So who is susceptible? Unfortunately, most of these diseases, which are called autoimmune, that term may sound familiar to many of you, such as lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, are more common in women. It's just because of the way the immune system works and behaves in women. Also, as you get older, your immune system can be tricked easier, and therefore you are more likely to get long COVID or its complications. If you're on any drugs that affect the immune system already, such as some chemotherapy agents and other drugs used that modulate the immune system, you are more likely to develop long COVID as well. If you are unvaccinated, so your immune system hasn't quite had a chance to work out the virus or its antigen and the antibody response quite well, you are more susceptible as well. So these are some of the risk factors. One interesting risk factor, and I know I said that patients who are asymptomatic can still develop long COVID. If you really had a bad initial experience of COVID-19, so your infectious stage was pretty severe, you're at home ill, or you were even hospitalized at Harrison Point or something like that, requiring oxygen. Now remember, your organs have already been damaged from that infectious process, and therefore you are more likely to continue with long COVID as well.
Okay. So you're not taking a look at people who might have when you say autoimmune, but there are also people who have NCDs. So that's why we would hear people with diabetes and hypertension and that sort of thing being susceptible. But I also remember hearing, and I don't want to give out incorrect information, but that there were people who were not diabetic coming out of COVID with diabetes.
Right. And let's work out why.
Why?
So what causes diabetes, right? Diabetes, or the type 2 diabetes that most people get in adults, so not type 1 where the pancreas is attacked as a child and you have to go on insulin. Type 2 diabetes where you may have to go on insulin, but most of these people are on tablets, but it's a lot more sinister because it's a vascular and cardiovascular disease, and not type 2 diabetes. It's a problem with inflammation. And if you have an immune system that's causing all this inflammation, it starts to attack various areas that utilize insulin, and therefore we get what's known as insulin resistance. Once that happens, that's really setting up the cascade for type 2 diabetes, even if you were not diagnosed before.
Right.
And guess what? All this inflammation also damages the inside of your arteries, which, if continued, can get stiffer, and the stiffness of your arteries then leads to increases in your blood pressure. So hypertension can also come along with it. So not only does long COVID or an acute COVID infection make the NCDs worse, it can actually unmask newly diagnosed NCDs such as diabetes and hypertension. And remember, all of this may be sitting in the landscape of obesity, which is already in itself an inflammatory condition.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at solutions. Because if you're like me right now, and your head's going like, from all of this information, you might just want to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich with the butt in the air, but you got to deal with it. So let's deal with it when we come back.
Let's fix it.
Let's fix it. All right, so I hope you're not like me, head thing doing this right now from the information, because this is reality. This is what doctors were trying to explain when they were saying the best way not to suffer from COVID is to prevent it. All the hand washing and all the mask wearing and so on, and getting those vaccines. This is what it was all about, to protect you from this. And so I always chuckled when I heard people talk about, oh, it's just a cold. Nuh-uh. For some, it might just manifest itself with sniffles and that sort of thing. But for quite a few people, they are still suffering the effects, and will still suffer the effects for a long time. So Dr. Connell, you just made a comment as we went to break about obesity being inflammation. Can you expand on that, please?
Sure. So obesity is a non-communicable disease. It's something that is very poorly documented, even by us as healthcare professionals. I often say that you review medical charts and you'll see listed high blood pressure, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and literally what's in the middle of it that's so obvious but not documented is obesity. Obesity is not just an innocent bystander, because we know, for instance, that the fat in obesity is not just there making you look bigger, but it's actually very active metabolically. Because it's active metabolically, it's the perfect environment, almost like a petri dish for inflammation. And so people who are living with obesity are very pro-inflammatory. There's lots of inflammation going on, which is why these were the initial people we thought would do worse in COVID-19, and who did do worse in COVID-19 because of the inflammatory response. They're also the category of people who are living with obesity who are more likely, to have consequences of long COVID because of this immune response or dysregulation of the immune response. And so it's important, yes, to control your blood pressure and your blood sugar and take all your medications and your complementary medicines as it is. But it's also important to take steps to lose weight so that you become less obese and closer to your own body weight, so that you become less inflammatory. And this is not a pill, right? This isn't like a vaccine. You can go and decide tomorrow, I'm going to just be normal body weight tomorrow. It's a whole lifestyle change that takes forever, and it's a continuous behavioral change, and many people get frustrated. So even as healthcare professionals, we shouldn't be hard on patients who say, I am struggling. I have to have my pudding and sauce on Saturday, and I don't really like exercise either, kind of thing.
Yes, okay. Now, you just mentioned a couple of things, and let me tell you, this could be like a 3-hour conversation with just the two of us, yeah? But we won't do that to the viewers. However, speaking from experience, I wish there was a pill like they have for hypertension, or they have for diabetes or whatever, that you can just take and not like poof lose weight, but break up that fat or whatever. Because there are so many stereotypes which are frustrating when you are overweight, and I hate the word obese, but obese, because there's this assumption that once you're this size, one, you overeat. Two, what you eat is fattening and all of this. No, there are some who eat a lot less than the rest of the population. Their plates are not piled high with junk. They don't drink sodas and all of this sort of thing, but yet their body type leads to, overweight. As a matter of fact, speaking from experience, I used to eat less, and apparently I was starving myself. So the body went into starvation mode, and then whatever I ate, no matter what it was, my body would then pack on the pounds because it was saving them, storing them for when next I starved it. Hello? So...
That's why I said it's not an easy fix.
No, it's not.
I hear your frustration, and I see your frustration every day from patients who say, I'm doing all that I can. And this is why, we can have a separate discussion on obesity and its management.
Please let us do.
Because there's some new drugs that are also out. They don't quite dissolve fat, which should be an easy fix, I suppose. But
That's too easy.
They use various mechanisms so that you lose weight. And hopefully the initial data out of the United States, although it's taking the drug for a prolonged period, is promising. So we do have some new drugs. There are also surgical procedures that some people have to go to who have severe obesity and have various health conditions. So it's important. But obesity does play a central role here. And we promised the viewers that we would fix it.
Yeah.
So here's some solutions for PASC, or post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 or otherwise known as long COVID. First, you only know how to fix something if you know what's out there. So we need a registry. We need a
Right.
national registry documenting all these symptoms so that you and I, because all of us are susceptible, if we think we have symptoms that might be suggestive of long COVID, there's somewhere we can upload to a system, or some healthcare professional will do so for us, so that there's a registry to say, okay, in Barbados, we are recognizing that these people, after X weeks having recovered from COVID, are all getting this annoying headache. Is this something we should be looking closely at? So, a registry. The second is the health system has to be calibrated. Now, in many health centers in the United States and around the world now, because long COVID, as you said, is an NCD. And what do we have in many health centers to manage NCDs? Special clinics with dedicated staff, dedicated environments to look and manage long COVID syndrome. So perhaps this is something, and rather than one person going to the hypertension clinic, then the respiratory clinic for the lung problem, the cardiologist for the heart problem, suppose we had a long COVID clinic where you could kind of get all of your issues, including psychological and mental health, addressed in one space. So, registry, the health system, and of course, the third pillar, because this is new to us as well, continued research. We need research,
Yes,
we need
please.
data to drive our management. And we need to admit, as scientists and doctors, when we get things wrong, and we need to respond to science and say, you know what, based on the current evidence, this needs to happen, or we need to stop doing this. And this is what has happened certainly in the pandemic. Scientists and doctors, as doctors, or doctors as scientists, are not meant to be arrogant and just say things like, this is the way it's going to be for the next 10 years, because we don't know what it's going to be for the next ten months. We have to rely on data coming from science to drive decision making so that it's informed and evidence based medicine.
Have you had any evidence base from, say, the bigger countries, or are they now compiling their data, their research?
Yes. So remember, I mentioned the National Institute for Health, or the NIH, which is the largest funding body for research in the United States, dedicated more than $1 billion to this. And so there are data evolving showing, for instance, the link between those risk factors we mentioned before. And more importantly, there's the use of artificial intelligence. Can you believe it? Artificial intelligence being used to kind of construct what the model of long COVID will look like. For instance, using your risk factors and saying, okay, based on your risk factors and these symptoms you're now having 2 months later, you're pretty much at a much higher risk of having long COVID, and you should see your doctor. So here's the use of innovation and technology and AI in diagnostics. And so as we get more and more and larger registries, hopefully we will be able to predict and prevent this from happening.
What about movement, Dr. Connell? I know that people use stress. The medical fraternity stresses exercise, and people, whenever they think about exercise, they immediately think of lifting weights and running miles, and but you stress movement. And because movement was restricted while you were trying to overcome COVID, many
Right.
people, were horizontal for quite some time. So what
Right.
kind of movement are you looking at? Length of movement, and frequency of movement?
Okay. So let me tell you what the recommendation is from one body, and I'll just quote the American Heart Association, which recommends that we all should exercise 150 minutes a week, which is basically 5 days a week, half an hour each day, right? And this exercise should be sufficient to raise your heart rate such that you're not able to speak in a complete sentence. So you can't casually stroll around the garrison, maybe stop, have a snow cone, chat with your neighbor, those kind of things. That's movement, but it's not cardiovascular exercise. You need to be able to move, get your heart rate up, and the recommendation is 150 minutes a week. But not all of us have the opportunity to go to a savannah or a gym every week. So there's simple adjustments we can make at home. From simple things such as, I am taking this interview standing so that I can
I
move
noticed.
around.
I was going to mention that. I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah, I purchased a standing desk because I got tired of sitting at my desk all the time on these calls. So I can move. I have my water or tea there, and I can consume it, stay hydrated. I can park further away from work and walk in. As much as I like using the consultant parking lot, the private parking lot at the hospital, I park across the street and walk over, then walk back
Okay.
to the car. Or the medical team, although they don't really like this, we take the stairs. I hope the university medical team at the hospital is watching, rather than the lifts at the hospital. That's because we want to encourage movement. Sometimes we take longer routes, like going up to the A floor, coming across, coming down, and going down to the C floor. So all those are minor adjustments we should do in our everyday life to get more physical activity. This is the season of emancipation approaching, or we're currently in, and
Yes.
basically it's a season of culture. Why can we not use culture to bring about more movement? So you go to a proper activity, or even you're at home listening to music, you move, you dancing, all those kinds of things are activities that bring about movement. You can be running around your table or dancing around your table, watching out for your toes, of course, and getting exercise in, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be going to a gym with a personal trainer. Everyone today, this is what I would like to call Motivation Monday, right? Get up and
I
move
like it.
more today. Whether it means that you are parking further from the supermarket and walking with groceries, whether it means that you're going up and down every aisle, although you don't need to buy everything in every aisle, right? But make sure that you're moving more, because guess what? Just as tobacco and its impact on health, we now know that sitting still for more than a certain period of time also increases your cardiovascular risk. So get people to get up and get moving.
What's that certain period of time? Um, what length of time should we set our phones to buzz at what? After 2 hours? After an
Right.
hour?
So maybe you read the data. So you should not be seated for more than 2 hours. You should get up and move around. That's the longest period. Of course, if you can get shorter breaks, get up and move during the commercial breaks, for instance. In
Right.
education, lesson plans, for instance, should be planned that students can get up and move between sessions. There's nothing to say a student has to sit down for 40 minutes at a desk just writing, unless it's an exam, right? Get up
Mm-hmm.
and move around, and teachers can structure their activities so that students can move. And it fights what I like to call the beginnings of this whole cascade of events, and that's childhood obesity. Getting movement in, especially during the lessons plan in a very strategic way from teaching, increases activity in children and addresses childhood obesity by movement.
What are the fix-its for people who have mobility issues like stenosis in the back or that sort of thing? Can't stand for long periods of time.
Right.
Um, yeah.
So remember, we said anything that gets your heart rate up. So obviously, people that have various mobility issues will have problems using certain limbs. So, for instance, at the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados, uh, on Tuesdays, I hope I got this day right, we have our stroke patients, and some of them cannot move their maybe the lower limbs or the upper limbs, and there are various machines that they can use to exercise the other limbs that they can move, right?
Hmm.
Or they may need assistance, but it's not just staying stationary. Other people may prefer to go to the beach and do swimming, where there's a bit more support in the water and they don't have to worry about injuring the back or putting more pressure on their back as well. Some people, as we get older, which all of us are getting older, kind of move away from running more into cycling because it's less stress on your joints from the constant bouncing up and down off the ground. So all those are maneuvers that you can do to
Hmm.
stay fit, even with mobility issues. But remember, the important thing is to get your heart rate up. Don't just casually just sit there and say, okay, let me just swing my foot up and down, and hopefully that counts as exercise, right? No, you have to be breathless to the point where you should not be able to speak in a complete sentence.
All right. And how then do you know when uh, it's too much?
Well, your body is great at telling you when it's too much. I know this from personal experience. So if you kind of go out there and decide, I'm going to be in the next Olympics, and you want to move from couch potato to Olympiad in 24 hours, your body will certainly tell you, right? It has to be. Remember that there's also a repair process. As you use muscle more, your muscle will be damaged, and part of the repair process, you'll get that stiffness and aching as well in muscle repair. So you have to take it slowly and maintain your hydration. Make sure that you're listening to your body. If, for instance, you're exercising, you start to feel lightheaded, stop. Don't kind of say, he said half an hour, so let me go some more. Listen to your body, and also listen to your doctor. We're pretty good at advising patients. Maybe you shouldn't go for the 150 minutes a week, or maybe we should do a certain test on you to make sure that you're okay for exercise. But have those conversations. Do not see your doctor visit as just dealing with, okay, I went on the internet and I found this pill, and why am I on it? Because it's killing me slowly, according to the FDA. But you should have conversations about, how do you think I can exercise more? Or, because I don't really go to the gym, what are some practical things you can tell me to do during the week to increase my activity?
Right. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Connell, if we can just, steal a little bit more of your time, Director. We did cut in with the DEM. So, because I wanted to ask about what you said, hydration and notes to self. How important is water? How bad is too much water? What type of water should we be drinking? And I know people are going, what kind of water? No, there are many different types of waters out there right now. Fruit infused, herbal infused. There are oxygen infused, and then there's the water which fizzes, or there's just the regular flat tap, and there's spring. So you see, that's, what is good for you, what is not, and can you drown yourself if you follow the recommendations of some people and drink 5 gallons? No, that's an exaggeration, but please, your thoughts. Water.
So let me just first declare, and I was never a big water fan, right? I probably was as a child, because it was, as I said, the only soft drink available came from a tap in the schoolyard, and it was water, right? So I had to drink water. But in adulthood, you get accustomed to a lot of flavored drinks, and you shied away from it. But water is important, and again, your body tells you when you've had enough water. You should aim to drink water until your urine looks almost clear. If your urine is looking more concentrated, that's telling you that your kidneys aren't getting enough water, and you need to top it up.
How often should you be going to the bathroom then, if you're going to put that there, to pass water?
That's difficult to predict and different from one individual to another, right? But when you do go to the restroom, you obviously shouldn't be going every hour. When you do use the restroom and you pass urine, your urine should be clear. And many guys in the gym, you kind of know, next to the urinal, there is what's called a P chart, and it has various colors, and it's telling you, if you are at this color, drink more water during your exercise. Or if you're here, you're pretty well hydrated. Or if you're darker over here, you're very dehydrated, and you should kind of stop exercise and top up on your water. So these things are strategically placed in gyms and in any laboratories, for instance, and you see them there. You can, you're passing urine, and you can check your urine to see, am I dehydrated? Because often we don't feel dehydrated. The other thing is that I have found helpful is walking around with a water bottle that has a measurement instrument, and making sure that you're getting your 2.5 to 3 liters every day. I know it's painful, I know, but if you have this one bottle that you're measuring, your aim is to kind of get to the bottom of that by the end of the day. And there are various kind of motivators to keep you going outside the bottle, like keep going, you're almost there, you're halfway there, drink some more water, remember. Or some people can set it on their phones, right?
Yeah.
Set an alarm on your phone to top up just about every 2 hours when you're going to get up and move, right? So that you can drink some more water. So what type of water? Well, any water that doesn't have, for instance, any added sugar, because you don't want the sugar sweetened element. So you can have fruit infused water. You can have carbonated water, because some people like the fizz and they don't like still water, for instance. Personally, I'm a carbonated fan. I kind of like sparkling water as well, because I feel as if I'm drinking something that's not water, but it is water, and it just it tastes good. It tastes better to me as
You
well.
want to know a little
Now,
trick to the trade? Normal glass of water, put in a lozenge, a vitamin C lozenge, you get your fizzy drink and no sugar.
you get your fizzy drink, but you probably do get a little bit of sugar from the lozenge, which might have some glucose. But so what about
No, they're
oxygen?
not. They're
So
non-sugar ones. Sorry,
they
go
they
ahead.
are.
Yeah.
So they are. There's a lot of hype about oxygenated water that's around in the press and it's in the media here and overseas. So we are actually not meant to be absorbing water, oxygen from our gut, huh? Because we're not fish, we don't have gills. Our anatomy is not designed to be absorbing oxygen. A lot of the evidence for oxygenation from drinking water and the benefits is extremely weak. So it sounds good to say that drink oxygen water and it will, it's a superoxidant, but your body has to absorb the oxygen and it has to incorporate it in a specific type of way. And guess what? We have a special organ that's specifically designed for that, and they're called lungs. So we aren't really meant to be drinking oxygenated water because that's not how we obtain our oxygen, right?
Right.
So go out there, drink your plain water. What's it called, Bomiston?
Bomiston Special.
Provided that the water station is working. But so make sure that you're drinking water, and also make sure you're especially at this time of the year that your water quality is where it should be. So don't
Yeah.
just turn on the tap and drink water and say, okay, this doesn't taste right, but he said to drink water. You might need to buy a water filter, or even sometimes immediately after a storm, drink bottled water. But drink any water. You don't have to drink oxygenated water. You can drink sparkling water if you like the fizz behind it. But water, keep hydrated, and watch the P chart. You can actually go online and Google these P charts, and you can see it on your phone. Look at your urine, and if it's looking too concentrated, it's time to top up.
Okay. And you keep on, jumping to my next question, because I was going to ask about water which is unfiltered and kidney disease. Is there a correlation? Does it impact kidney disease? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in the past, and not even in the distant past, huh? So there have been some concerns about the calcium content of water, especially we're a coral-based island, and there's probably a lot more calcium salt in our water than in other areas that are not calcium-based, like many of the other Caribbean islands. However, it also depends on the way your body handles calcium. So if your body is handling calcium correctly, you should get rid of calcium safely without causing calcification in your kidneys or kidney stones. So if you are one of those people who are predisposed to that, maybe your body's not handling calcium correctly, or you're drinking really hard water, is just what it's called, which is very unlikely in our setting because I know there are additives to our water system as well for purification purposes. It's very unlikely you're going to develop calcium stones just from drinking your water.
Okay.
The other thing is the pH or the acidity of your urine is also regulated by your kidney, and that mechanism also helps dissolve any crystals or calcium salts that can form there as well. So don't think that, geez, if I drink all this water, the inside of my kidneys are going to start looking like my kettle, because that's not the case. Calcium has settled out in your kettle because you've boiled it to a certain temperature, and the salt has solidified out on cooling.
Okay. And finally, Dr. Connell, where do you stand on the argument with room temperature water and cold water?
Okay, so this is a big debate. This is the debate for 2022. Should I drink room temperature or should I drink cold water? And if I drink cold water, will it chill my heart? Which is what
Yes.
my mother used to say. Right?
Yeah, and freeze the brain. Yeah.
It's your preference. I have to admit, I just want an ice cold glass of water. As I'm approaching a certain decade mark, I'm tending not to like that, right? I'm tending to appreciate room temperature. And I used to look at people drinking room temperature water and think, that must be disgusting.
It
But
is.
guess what? It's your personal preference. There's really no health reason. There is one slight health reason, and that is if you drink water that's extremely cold, it could stimulate a nerve that's stimulated as you swallow ice cold water called the vagus nerve, and that has the potential of slowing your heart down. So maybe the going to chilling your heart is maybe not a bad analogy, but that's for people who are drinking long periods of ice cold water. So try to avoid that. But for average bottled water that maybe you took from the fridge and you've allowed it to cool, not from the freezer, you can have your water. It's your preference. Just get out there and drink water.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Kenneth Connell, for joining us today. A wealth of information, and we are looking forward to having you back at the end of July. And
Straight
perhaps,
into crop over season.
crop over season. It'll be interesting to see what topic we'll be discussing then. But thank you so
Yeah.
much. You continue to stay safe. And I certainly hope that you have a really great month until we see you again.
Thank you, and happy end of June to you as well.
Okay, all the best, Doc. Coming up next on Face It and Fix It, we're going to take a look at polling. Just what is the background scene like in polling? How do they take those polls, and what exactly do they look for? Well, we're going to learn about it when we come back. You're watching Face It and Fix It for today, Monday, June 27th, and I'm Peter Aline, sitting in for Joyanne today, who's a little under the weather. She is better though, and so keeping fingers crossed that she'll be able to join us on Friday. Dr. Connell just now was taking a look at long COVID, and every time he mentioned something, he kept on talking about data and the importance of research and analysis on all of the varying variables and factors which have come into play. And it's a nice segue, I think, into our next discussion, because we recently had the Grenada polls, and we've got a new government in Grenada. And the polls were saying different things. And what I wanted to, ask our next guest, first of all, if he had an idea of how on point the polling was for the Grenada elections. And he's a good person to answer that. He's research analyst and co-director of the Caribbean Development Research Services, CADRES. Corey SANDIFORD. Corey, long time no see. Nice to see you.
More is true.
Definitely.
Nice seeing you too.
Yeah. Tell me something. You know there were many polls done for Grenada. I don't think I heard quite the outcome. It was going to be close, you heard some say, or it was going to be a different outcome. What was the polling like in Grenada?
Okay, so I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have this morning, and what I'm about to speak to you about is something that I hope to touch on, which is the relationship between the media and polling. which is something that the public needs to appreciate. I will give a bit of context to what we just saw in Grenada before I answer your question, but I promise to bring it home.
Okay.
So whenever you see a political party that's dominating whenever you see a party that's dominating the political landscape in the Caribbean, for those of us old enough now to remember and have been paying attention, we've seen quite a few of those since, say, the 1990s, where they either hold all the seats or majority in Parliament. And you would have, those political parties would have their support base of voters who will vote for the party no matter what. And then it's really the moderate voters, when you see them voting heavily in one direction or alternatively not voting at all for successive elections, is because they don't see much of a choice. So to get back to Grenada, on the surface, we see Keith Mitchell removed from office and we say, oh, voters finally fell out of love with Keith Mitchell. But the reality is they were possibly out of love with him for a long time, but they weren't really seeing an alternative the other side. In terms of polls, the most recent that we can speak to did show that the NDC had managed to consolidate support, its traditional support base. It's not traditionally been a party that is as strong as the NNP, or the new Prime Minister in Grenada, Dickon Mitchell, has not been involved in politics for a long time, but it showed that he had managed to consolidate the traditional support behind the party. So he was definitely trending upwards, we can say that, going into the election. But to get back to the point about media and polling, it's always a question of what is being put out there, people's perceived media biases, and so on, and the narratives going into the election. And there were also, people's own biases will also feed into how they interpret what the media is telling them about the polling.
And also previous polls, when you hear, like, okay, this particular district was moving in a particular direction in the last election, and you're perhaps thinking that not much change, so it should be continuing in that general direction in the next election to come, or does it change, once they get representation and they're happy with it? What variables can change, within a particular constituency or parish or community?
Well, there's a long time in politics. You have international impacts, you have local impacts in terms of people's political opinion. And so in the polling business, you never want a scenario where you're having to speak to a poll that was done too long before an election, because it's always going to be a case where you don't know what may have changed in terms of public opinion from the time the poll was done up until the election date. And it can shift, and that is always the question. So you will have people who always have the knife sharpened for you in the polling business, because they want to be able to say, you got it wrong. You said that it was X and it turned out to be Y. Right. And the reality is there are a lot of different factors. Are you able to speak to the polling that was done? Has the client given you permission to release it? What permission did the client give you in terms of the type of information to be released? It might be a media client, so they may have an interest in publishing it themselves without having, say, a political party or a third party who's interested in conducting a poll. So they will want to publish it because they want to drive sales or views of their newspapership. They want to drive views and their readership as well. Right. But you never want a scenario where you have a poll that has been released to the public. We're in June, the end of June now, so this is just a theoretical example. But you don't want to be speaking to a poll from March and saying what you saw then is what is likely to happen now because of all those impacts that I listed. Okay, so let's look at polling then. What goes into it? Because, we see a poll, and we see lots of numbers and percentages and so on and words, but what goes into it? Teach us. Okay, so the number one thing is that you have to be ready to move at short notice. And I should mention before I get into that, what the background is, that the public tends to be most familiar with political polling, but that's not the only type of work that one does as a pollster. One works in market research, one works in social research, but these things are not necessarily as quote unquote sexy when it comes to publishing them, or the client may not have an interest in publishing them unless it's for the public good. In the case of social research, market research clients seldom have interest in because that is a means to an end. But you have to be ready to move at short notice. We have teams on the ground in each of the territories where we conduct polling, and we have established communication lines with the team. You want to have a team manager who is a capable person, a trustworthy person, who you can get that to turn around in a short space of time, because in response to your previous question, you want to get in the field and get out in a short space of time, usually a weekend, because you don't want a situation where things are happening on the ground or outside of the country politically that can be impacting on the opinions that you're collecting. And then you have your survey templates modified to suit whatever your client's needs are. And your client is always going to have different needs. I wouldn't say that any two polls are alike in this business. So you brief your team. Sometimes extra training is required depending on the requirements of the survey. And you get in the field and you get it done.
Okay. Now, when you say that, you have your team, sometimes you might have to, brief them. What sort of things are you briefing them on?
Well, they have a rigorous list of instructions that they need to follow. Really, you are, as a pollster, as good as your team. So I'm the person that you see sitting down and talking to you now, but I don't have a credible reputation unless the teams that go out are able to produce a quality result. So you need your team to be well briefed. You need them to have rigorous instructions, which they do. And the most important thing here that I would mention as well, which would not be news to the public, but people may not pay as much attention to it as they would to the actual outcomes of the poll, that every time a team goes into the field, they have quotas which they need to meet in terms of the number of men that they're to interview, in terms of women, and then those are also stratified in terms of age groups. So the areas, we always have a polling plan. You want to be specific with the type of area that you choose. You don't want an area that is likely to be too biased in one direction or the other. So you want to poll the most balanced areas. And then when you go into those most balanced areas, you also want balance in terms of the type of person that you're interviewing. And you do so many of this type of person, so many of that type of person. You don't go in doing it airy-fairy. You have targets.
All right.
There is science to it as well.
Yeah, I get you. We're going to take a quick break, and because I find this really fascinating, because people talk about shaping a poll, but then that would have some kind of idea in it that you all are shaping the answers that you want, which is something that I know that you all stridently say no. It comes out from the analysis of the poll that you're taking. But when we come back, I want to know, a company like CADRES, what goes into then the poll? Do you have any input at all? Think about that. When we come back, we'll get the answer. You're watching Face It and Fix It. We have Corey SANDIFORD here with us, research analyst and co-director at the Caribbean Development Research Services, better known as CADRES. Oh dear, sorry about that. My telephone. I do apologize, could have sworn I turned it off. Anyway, we're looking at polling, and Corey was just explaining some of the background ideas involved in polling, but I wanted to know about the input. How much input is there from you, CADRES, as opposed to your client, whether it's a media concern or not?
Once it's your phone ringing, Peter, and not mine, because I know that you will have my head.
So, and I should have my own head. But yeah, how that happened, I don't know. It's mine.
Most of the input comes from us. The level of the input that a client has would mostly depend on the client. The same way no two polls are alike, no two clients are alike. But in the end, there are certain things that as a research company, you're willing to give way on in terms of the product that actually, final version that actually goes out, and certain things that you won't do. So no client is going to be able to come and tell you how many people that you poll, because we know how many we need in order to produce a statistically reliable result. One is representative population. They're not going to tell you which areas to poll because of the same reason. They're not going to tell you, for example, the way that you should ask the questions. We know how we want to frame the questions. But the types of information that you target is going to vary from client to client. Sometimes the client just wants a horse race, so you go out with essentially a one-pager. And then other clients may need to know more. They may need to know more detailed information. So the types of questions is a longer survey that goes out. But ultimately, it's CADRES that would determine these, and you produce a final version in consultation with the client.
All right, so it's kind of like a joint effort in terms of, that sort of thing, and really trusting on your expertise and your knowledge as well. So what kind of challenges, though, can you meet in that particular type of exercise? What kind of challenges, and, seen or unforeseen?
Well, the main two are weather and sudden illness, especially in the COVID era. And then once you're dealing with people, things can go wrong. So, for example, we're expecting some inclement weather. You never know when that can come up when you're planning a poll. You may know a day or so ahead if so much, or the rain might turn out to be more than anybody thought it was, and that can hold things up. That's unideal, but it's something that you have to live with. And then, as I said, sudden illness on an individual basis. You may have to get someone to cover an area that you didn't plan to do it that way. Once you're dealing with people, and things can go wrong. It could become evidence that you have someone in your midst that is compromised in some way. For example, a regular team member that might develop a family situation that is pulling on their time and energy. So they may try to cut corners to cover their assignment, but this quickly becomes evident to us then when you analyze the information, because you do conduct checks and balances. You don't simply accept what is being reported to you. The teams are trustworthy, but you still do your checks and balances to ensure that everything looks the way that it should. When it's not being done according to the instructions that CADRES would send out, it quickly becomes evident when you do your checks and balances, because even when someone tries to deceive the system, human error would invariably show up once you run it through a computer and you ask it to check the data.
Okay. Are citizens mainly trusting of the process? Have you ever met any hostility and so on in the field? And as you personally, because I'm sure you've been in the field yourself, have you ever really met any hostility?
I have not met any myself. I know that some team members have. People typically view surveys as their opportunity to quote unquote cuss you, because we never tell them who the client is, or we seldom tell them who the client is. In some cases we do, like when we did one with the Hotel Association, Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association recently. But usually the client is not revealed to the people who you interview in the field, but they will have their own idea of who may be conducting it. And so they may take that interaction with the team member to be an opportunity to tell off the person who they perceive to be behind the poll. And they take out their verbal frustration on the team member because they perceive them to be represented. I guess it's like customer service.
Right, exactly. The person up
but for the most part, these situations never become extreme, though. Team members are instructed that, when the interview does, we're going to be escalating in terms of their emotions to politely withdraw and seek someone else to interview.
What happens to the data after it's been collected? How then, what do you do with it? I heard you mention the computer and database, so I assume that that's where it goes in.
Well, in the old days, we were using paper surveys, so you had to enter that into a computer before you could do anything with it.
Wow.
So data entry was a process. But now, being in 2022, we have apps for that, and we have...
Of course you do. Of course
exactly,
you do.
we have smart devices that you can use to collect the information. So the information is being fed into it's being entered as the interviewers, the team members conduct the process. So once you know for sure that you've covered your numbers, you've reached your target, then you want to make sure you have a clean data set. You want to go through it and check that you don't have any weird responses. I was mentioning earlier instances where people may be compromised for one reason or another. You don't want that to be the case. But once we have a clean data set, you conduct your analyses, and from there you generate your tables and your charts, and you proceed to report on the numbers as you see them.
Right.
There is a bit of subjectivity to that, as I can admit that as a pollster, but that's part of the business. You have to try and report on what you're seeing as objectively as possible.
Right. Have there been any surprises in the past? Surprises that perhaps you can share, that stand out in your mind?
Well, the one that jumps to mind is in 2013 in Barbados. Back in those days, it seems a long way off now, but 2013 we had the benefit at the time of having more surveys conducted politically than we had at any other time. So we were approaching an election at the time, and we had a wealth of data collected, and the data had been trending in one direction, but due to circumstances on the ground, as time went on, as we reached the election, it started to change in a different direction. And based on the trend that we have been seeing consistently over the years leading up to 2013, it was a surprise at the time. But I mean, hindsight being 2020, you get a better idea of what may have produced the outcomes that it did. But that's one surprise where one can acknowledge that, it wasn't what happened in the end was not the way that it had been looking. But at the same time, again, timing is key. So you always want the most recent information, and that's really what factors in there.
So what kind of variables then could change the outcome and cause that type of surprise?
Well, it could be anything that scares people for any reason. Let's say someone drops a political bombshell on an election campaign platform, something that they had been saving for such an occasion to really kind of turn the tide, and it captures the public imagination, because they can have bombshells that end up being duds, or a person thought it would be a bombshell, it doesn't turn out to be that. But it can turn the tide, it can shift public opinion, or people can just decide that they don't really like the way that a campaign was run, or it can work the other way too. When a campaign is done in a certain way, it can kind of like fortify people in their minds in terms of their leanings, but there are also where people go into the polling stations and they really don't know what it is that they ultimately want to do, and you see that coming out in polling, and that can be difficult to call, but you still have the responsibility to do it as a pollster, because that's what people are expecting.
Right. I know it's going to be a weird kind of question to ask, but do you factor in for variables in your analysis and your polling? Do you factor them in?
Well, something that I could have mentioned at the top is that always remember that when CADRES conducts polling, any poll that we do know is feeding into a body of knowledge and a body of work. So there's history. And so no poll is conducted in a vacuum. Whenever we have a poll in another Caribbean country now, it will be done against the background of whatever took place there before. And yes, public opinion will shift, but you know that as a pollster, you need to be open-minded to what you see trending or shifting, a shift from the trends that you have been seeing. So I think the question that you're really asking about is narratives as opposed to the data itself, because the data is going to be the data. Once
Exactly.
you're
That you
confident
can't.
in,
Yeah.
yeah, once you're confident that you've done your checks and balances and everything in the field was done the way that it was supposed to be, and you only want to use team members that are going to report to you the way it's supposed to be reported, you as the person reporting on it, it's really then up to you how you interpret. And please bear in mind, and this is something that comes up time and time again, there's nothing to be gained as a pollster from calling an election or calling anything in a way that goes against what the data seems to be telling you, because there is going to be a test that takes place outside of you. Everybody is going to see the result. And if you
Exactly.
called it another way contrary to what you're seeing, it's only you that's going to suffer. And in this line of business, you're as good as your credibility. So it doesn't make sense trying to produce a result. And I think that's the people that do sharpen the knives for you. That's often their perception of you, that you're trying to produce a result and say that this thing is going to happen, and you haven't really done it the way that you need to do it in order to prove that.
Right. Y'all take some blows though, and I don't just mean your company, I mean all pollsters, because one way or the other, people will hear things that they don't want to hear and they go for this particular group. And so, yeah, sometimes y'all can take some lashes, but you're as good as your
Yeah, but
last poll, I suppose.
it's not the polling that's controversial. I always say, Peter, it's the politics that are controversial.
Yeah,
So if the polling involves politics, it will always be controversial, because no matter what the outcome is, it's not going to please everybody. If it says this party is going to be winning, the other party is going to be upset. If it says it's a statistical dead heat between the two parties or three parties or what have you, someone is going to think that they should be outright winning. So it's never going to please everybody, but it really comes down to the dynamics of the politics on the ground, and that's what makes it so controversial. And that goes
right.
back to your question too about hostility, encountering
Yeah.
hostility on the ground, and whether people on the ground trust the polling, the political culture.
Right. Well, I've got quite a few other, questions to ask, in particular, since we have Fix It in our name, looking at solutions. How do we fix it? Perhaps change people's thoughts or ideas about polling. And one of the things you mentioned, market research. I know we talk a lot about politics and we talk a lot about political polls, but you also do market research, and I just saw what part of one that the organization did for UNICEF, and quite comprehensive on children and COVID. So the different types of polls, perhaps when we come back with Corey Sandiford, research analyst and co-director of CADRES, when we come back. We hear of polls being done. We hear the results of polls being done. We never understand fully what goes into them. We have an idea, a basic idea, because we see the results of the polls, but there's a lot of background work, that is done behind the scenes, as we've just found out from Corey Sandiford, and there are things which will impact the outcome of a poll, and no, not because it's supposed to. It's because things will happen, like bombshells being dropped, as he said, and so on. But we've been looking at the political polling, but you did mention, there's types of market research and so on. Those are slightly different. What goes into those, Corey?
You say they're different. They're different in terms of outcomes, in terms of the
sexiness and non-sexiness.
Well, again, a market research client will seldom have interest in publishing a poll because they're doing it for business reasons. In terms of the social research, if I compare, to use the word sexy, if I compare social research to politics, what will always be missing is that sense of who will win. Right. Because even a political poll conducted outside of an election, like let's say a midterm poll, the voters, whoever reads the newspaper or sees the poll being reported on TV, still has a memory of what happened in the most recent election, what the outcome was. So there's always the intrigue of what this one is saying and whether it is reflecting what happened before, or is there a complete change, and what's it saying about this party now, what's the latest. So social research is different. There are any number of issues that I've heard people on our local call-in programs call and say there should be a poll done on this, poll should be done on that. Sometimes you do receive that benefit. You were referring to a poll that was done on UNICEF, pleasure of myself of conducting on behalf of the Heart and Stroke Foundation in Barbados a few years ago, their poll on health and drinking, and you had Dr. Connell on before. I keep following Dr. Connell on these programs. I want him to come and follow me one of these days. But anyhow,
I'll make a note of that.
Yes, we would have worked alongside Dr. Connell and so on in terms of that poll that went out, and that was widely reported on the population. I do think that that's a poll, the type of survey that would have caught the imagination of the public in terms of what was being reported. And interestingly, it looked a lot at education. It looked a lot at our schools and what people should be having at any day. It was not a survey that went out and interviewed professionals and asked them how they think X, Y, and should be done. It was a survey that went out and it asked the public for their perceptions on certain things. And I would just add to that, and this is a compliment to the Heart and Stroke Foundation in the way that they went about things. For instance, that a rigorous process led up to that. We're talking about background to polling today. So before that poll hit the streets, so to speak, we had focus groups done. So we brought in different demographics and we focus group them so that when the questions went out to the public, for sure that these are the types of questions you should be asking. This is the way that you should be wording it in order to get the right result. This option, when I ask Peter this particular question, I need to include option 5 as opposed to just option 4, because option 5, whatever that may be an important thing for Barbadians that you need to include when you're asking that type of question, and so on. One other thing I could quickly is piloting, and you don't always have the benefit to do this in terms of time, but sometimes before you start a survey, you have the benefit of conducting a pilot exercise. So you go out and that will tell you if any of the questions that you're asking people on the ground are too confusing, if it's too long-winded and you need to find a shorter way to ask it, and those types of issues as well. So I think that's a useful thing to mention to your viewers this morning as they listen, that goes into the actual version that hits the streets. But yes, I hope I've given an understanding of why political polling would always be considered sexy to report on.
One of the things that I didn't get a chance to ask you about, though, is the Americans and their exit polls. What was this putting you on spot? I hope not. What are they? They talk about them, and from those types of polls, they could get an idea. But supposing people lie in.
Well, yes, there's always that possibility that people are lying. You can't put me on the spot because if I know, I can tell you I know. But the truth is, I don't know scientifically. I know what I read.
Right.
But I can't claim that I've done extensive research on my own on exit polling. I understand the principle of it. But
so do I, but I don't get it.
Here. Right, but what we can say though, Peter, is culturally, you can't do that down here in the Caribbean. You can't go to polling stations or outside 100 feet from polling stations or what have you and ask people who they voted for. That comes from fairly sophisticated and old, might I add, democracies, where people don't have a problem revealing who they voted for one way or another. Another intricate thing in that is our Caribbean countries are so small that our populations always have this idea that, you know, you can identify me and you can associate me with who I say I vote for, or who you know me to vote for. And that can hurt me in any number of ways, professionally, socially. So that's not going to fly down here. But I understand why they like it in those countries, because it's very on the ground, up to the time, down to the minute. The media is giving the media content to report on election day, and you want to drive everything to that big outcome on the night of. So I understand it, but I can't claim that I know much about the science of it. I don't really think it's anything that one should trust scientifically. Ultimately, there's a difference between conducting a survey and interviewing whoever you can interview.
Yeah.
And we have done those. We have done those for some clients in the past where they've asked for it, but you can't then turn around and claim that this is representative of what will happen. You can just say this is the way that it looks, or we can speak for the people who we interviewed, but we can't claim that that's representative for Barbados, for example.
Right. Plus, I think they walk around with cards or something on which state if they're Democrat or Republican or something like that. But I just figure I could tell you anything, and you can know the difference, really. You know.
Yeah. But I there will be people who lie, but I don't think that those will ever be any majority. But I still don't think it should be trusted. And what I don't like here in Barbados is the idea that our people may see that happening overseas and think that that is how we do things here.
Right, and we don't. We most definitely don't. Because you were here, then none of your business. Coming real hard.
Oh no, I don't see that ever flying in this
on the
world.
day of, no, not at all.
No, 100 years from now.
Right, so, okay, what doesn't work and how can you fix it? What kind of solutions? You're telling me now there's an app, so obviously the I don't want to say equipment, but the technology has moved up with the time, so all of the data entry is a thing of the past, you know. But what doesn't work? What could work better? What concerns you have, and what are the solutions you have for fixing it?
Well, I don't know if it can be fixed, but I would say from a purely passionate, I can't claim to be dispassionate on this one, so don't let me give a wrong impression. But from a purely passionate perspective, I would love our public approach to how we receive polls to begin to change, because it is, honestly, it gets a little tiring when you speak to polls publicly of repeating the same things over and over. These are the processes we went through to produce this outcome, and then people are on social media or they're calling in to call-in programs, and they're claiming that this thing happened when you very clearly reported on the way it didn't happen, on the way it happened, and it was not that. So they're countering things that they can read and appreciate for themselves, but they're still coming up with false information. And I think that is a reflection of our politics. I go back to a point that I mentioned earlier in this conversation, which is that one doesn't have anything to benefit from speaking to a survey and claiming a result, claiming to see something that is not there, because ultimately it's going to show you up one way or another, and professionally that doesn't make any sense. In terms of our own processes, I would say conducting surveys is always evolving. Mm-hmm. encounter a data set or a particular project, everyone is different. Like I say, you encounter some new dynamic on the streets that you didn't know was happening before, and that informs you then in the way that you may conduct your business in the future, because sometimes the information that you're trying to collect is very sensitive. May not even have, you being me, may not even have considered it that way, but when you hit the streets, you're getting a strange response from people. Sometimes people did not want to state their opinions on a certain thing in front of the interviewer because the interviewer was not somebody who they knew. So that it was definitely an issue. In this case, I'm thinking of an attitude survey that we conducted towards LGBT people, and people were not comfortable telling the interviewer. They'd had opinions, so it wasn't a question of having opinions, but they were not comfortable telling the interviewer, someone who's a stranger to them, how they felt about this thing. They were more comfortable telling someone who they knew. And then you learn from that as someone who conducts surveys, as a researcher, and that informs how you go about things in the future.
Right. Do you find face-to-face or via telephone more effective?
We don't frequently encourage our clients to conduct surveys online or via telephone.
Okay.
Clients like the idea of an online survey very frequently, but they always are thinking ahead of the outcome of what they think they're going to get from doing it, but they're not thinking of the practical concerns that you have in conducting such a survey. And I can say broadly that in this line of business, that is the main thing, that people think they understand research, but they don't, because if it's not your actual work, then you don't have enough of an idea of what goes into it or what may come up. So online surveys, very poor response. You send out an online survey, you'll get back about 1% of what you sent back, because very few people will conduct it. It's an easy thing to ignore. Telephone surveys, you can do them, but you have to keep them short. We have done them in the past, but only in instances where a client was certain that was the way they would want to go. Sometimes it's more practical because you don't want to cover the island, so to speak, because it's not an issue that requires that breadth of an operation. But at the same time, it's always preferable in our instance to have someone speak face to face with the person, because that's what's going to be most likely to get you a response from people, as opposed to calling them on the phone when you can be ignored, or people can say they simply don't want to do it. I mean, they can say that in person too, but you understand where I'm going, what I'm getting at.
Yeah. We got St. Kitts Nevis coming up next, am I right? Is St. Kitts?
It's possible, yes.
Possible. He hasn't called the date as yet.
We can only say at this point that it's what looks like it will happen in terms of being next.
Yeah, he hasn't called the date as yet. Any polls have been done? Has that government done any of that you know of? That we can get some kind of idea what the thinking of the people on the ground is?
Nothing that I can speak to. Nothing that I can speak to here. What I can tell you, I can give you what the trends have been, and I can respond to you in that way.
Okay.
We know that in St. Kitts we had a government that was much like the one that was just removed from office in Grenada, which was the Labour Party government, which had been in for a long time. They were removed in 2015. Since then, we've had Team Unity in government. Team Unity won in 2015 and again in 2020 in the height of the pandemic. So now Team Unity appears to be experiencing challenges on the ground. And the question is whether the Prime Minister can win another election in some new updated form. The question in the Labour Party, again, it has its history. So we know that they've been traditionally strong. They've changed leadership now to Terence Drew. And like Canada, we would question whether he's been able to consolidate that support going into any election, the Labour Party support that was there, that has been there, and attract new support, so to speak, more moderate voters, as opposed to people who traditionally vote for them, who could swing the election in their direction. That would be the question mark going into the election. It's really a Terence Drew versus Timothy Harris election, and whether people on the ground like what they're receiving, and they trust that despite the challenges, a new government could be produced that would lead them in the way they want to be led.
Okay. I want to carry out my own personal little survey eventually to see if, calling elections in pandemics really and truthfully worked for some or for all, or, was a mess for some. But that's only my own little
It
personal.
worked for some, and it worked to a point, insofar as one could claim it as a natural disaster, but then it made conditions really tough on the ground, and then the question of vaccines enters the conversation, and that complicated matters. I feel like I should mention before we wrap up our conversation this morning that CBC has done surveys with CADRES before, so we've had media surveys,
Yeah.
all the background that we've spoken to this morning and the field work, we've had that nice history with CBC in that way as well.
Yeah. Basically, and I think we need to do a couple more, as our population ages and trends, as you say, shift. A lot of our stuff now is via video chat, not face to face. You're not sitting down across the desk here from me as it used to be, which I personally, as a dinosaur, like, because it's that human interaction, I get to see when your eyes twinkle and you know that I'm saying something silly, or I know from the way you look at me, okay, don't go there, Peter, but it's that human interaction that is really and truthfully so critical. Music has changed as well, what people want to hear. And I keep on talking about the Add Water and Stir Society. It's all very immediate these days. That's
social media.
Yeah, it's very, very immediate. Nobody wants to spend time sitting down listening to anything for too long. So, hey, perhaps we need to do some more new surveys. But Corey, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you outside of an election where the stress and, and all of that. But just to find out what you do, because I know people are aware of it, but they're not really aware of it, the work that goes into it. So I thank you very much for taking the time. And perhaps when we hear a little more about St. Kitts' date, we'll have you then join us and we take a look at what's happening on the ground there. So you stay safe, Peter, and stay blessed.
You as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been really and truthfully an informative day here on Face It and Fix It. Joyanne, I really, really hope that you rub some Vicks and put some socks on and take care of that, hoarse coffee throat that you have. And we're going to take a quick break. And when I come back, we're just going to review all the information that we absorbed today when we come back. It's been a highly informative Monday, really and truthfully packed with information as we began with Mrs. Danielle Skeet from the Department of Emergency Management, and basically telling you, like, look, make sure that around you is clean and clear, make sure that the gutters are clean and clear, make sure the drains are clean and clear. Sometimes your neighbors and so on will be mowing their lawns, and yeah, they do clean up and so on, but some of the grass still escapes. That is the sort of thing that you need to make sure that you sweep up and bag and put away. And who knows how high some of the gusts will be. We had a gust, I think I heard Carrie Ann last night on the weather news say was something like 40-something miles per hour or kilometers per hour. So listen, just make sure that everything tied down that can be loose. Bring in the really nice garbage cans that we have that you don't want to blow away, but make sure that you have it brought inside. Chairs for outside that might blow away. Just make sure everything is all nice and neat and empty for the wind to pick up. And your pets, your dogs or so on, perhaps release them so that they can find their own way. And if you have your dogs that are house trained, put them out early, feed them early, so they do the business early, and then bring them in early so you don't have to think about them, all those little things. And then long COVID with Dr. Kenneth Connell. Who knew that this pandemic, as soon as you think that you're over one hump, there's another hump again, and now it's the after effects of it. So you just want to make sure that you look after yourself, you take care of yourself. And arising out of that conversation, if you're going to be taking the alternative medication, let your doctor know so that he knows and can work your medication to suit, so that you don't go drinking a whole set of, what is it, pawpaw leaves or soursop, plus your hypertension medication, and then wonder why you are on the ground because your pressure's too low. That's not wise. So always talk to your doctor. And then polling, you see lots in there to unravel when it comes to all the analysis and so on. So it's been a great Monday, and I'm going to say Joyanne's going to be with you on Friday because we're going to work on her, but she'll be better. She's a lot better than she was last week, so that's good to know. I'm Peter Allen. Thank you so much for sharing your Monday with me. Take care, and bye-bye.